failing comic book from the 80s was actually hidden inside a 300-year-old painting by Rembrandt? I know, it sounds pretty out there, but there's this powerful idea that connects them. An idea that completely changes how you see the anatomy of a story and maybe even the anatomy of truth itself. I mean, it sounds like the beginning of a really strange joke, right? But the answer is this incredibly powerful way of thinking, a specific method for looking deeper that has a name you might even recognize, the anatomy lesson. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll see exactly how it connects these two completely different worlds. Okay, let's start with our first piece of the puzzle, a DC horror comic from the early 1980s that was really struggling. This is the story of how Saga of the Swamp Thing was pulled back from the brink of cancellation, all by looking inward at the anatomy of its own monster. Now you gotta remember, this wasn't Superman or Batman we're talking about. Swamp Thing was kind of a B-list horror character. The premise was pretty simple. A scientist, Alec Holland, gets caught in a lab explosion out in a swamp and, poof, he emerges as this monstrous plant creature. But by the 80s, the story had just totally run out of steam. The comic was about to be canceled for good. So, to save the comic, DC decided to take a huge gamble on this young, mostly unknown British writer named Alan Moore. And Moore's plan? It wasn't to just write the next chapter. No, his plan was basically creative demolition. He was going to tear the entire character down to its very foundations. And you know, as one fan on Reddit put it so perfectly, Moore's method was just to blow it all up. He took this concept that was getting really stale and decided to perform a kind of autopsy on it, to cut it open and see what was really inside, and if there was anything in there worth saving. And that right there brings us to our first huge clue. The title of Moore's very first story, the one that changed everything for this character, was called The Anatomy Lesson. And that wasn't just some catchy title. It was basically a mission statement for what he was about to do. Okay, so here is the absolutely radical twist at the heart of Moore's story. He posed a totally new question. See, the old story was always about who Swamp Thing was. He was a man, Alec Holland, trapped in a monster's body. Moore's story asked a different question. What was Swamp Thing? And the answer was just shocking. The creature was never Alec Holland at all. Holland had actually died in that explosion. Swamp Thing was just a plant that had absorbed the dead scientist's memories and consciousness and had built a brand new identity for itself, believing it was him. So you see what he did, right? Moore basically put the character on a metaphorical operating table and dissected his entire identity. He took the core premise apart piece by piece and revealed this completely new and frankly way more interesting truth that was hiding underneath. He turned a simple monster story into this profound story about what identity even is. Now, hold that thought about a metaphorical anatomy lesson, because to really get where Moore got this incredible idea, we have to jump in a time machine and rewind the clock way back over 300 years to 17th century Amsterdam to see the original anatomy lesson. See, back then, science wasn't something that just happened in some quiet, dusty lab. It was a performance. It was a show. Cities would build these incredible anatomical theaters where huge crowds would gather to watch surgeons perform human dissections. It was a massive social event, a real symbol of civic pride, and a way to show off humanity's growing understanding of the world. And these events were something else. They were commissioned by these really powerful guilds, and the bodies they used were always from executed criminals. It was seen as a kind of final public punishment. And get this, to keep things from decomposing too quickly, they were only held in the winter. And hundreds of people would show up. Students, doctors, regular citizens, and after the dissection was over, it was pretty common to have a big celebratory banquet and a torchlit parade. I mean, it was literally science as a public spectacle. This bizarre and fascinating intersection of science, society, and mortality caught the eye of one of the greatest artists of all time, Rembrandt. The Amsterdam Surgeons Guild actually hired him to paint these events, and in doing so, he turned a fleeting scientific demonstration into a timeless work of art. And here's the thing. Just like with Alan Moore's comic book story, the whole point of a literal anatomy lesson was to look beneath the surface. The reason you'd cut open a body in front of hundreds of people was to reveal the hidden machinery inside. The bones, the muscles, the nerves, to try and understand how this incredibly complex thing actually works. It was a search for a deeper physical truth. Okay, so here it is. This is the moment where these two worlds, a 17th century dissection and a 20th century comic book, finally and completely collide. The connection isn't the subject, it's the technique. Think about it. Rembrandt and the surgeons of his day were dissecting a physical body to understand its hidden structure. Alan Moore took that exact same principle, that act of careful, deliberate deconstruction, and he applied it not to a body, but to an idea, to a fictional character's identity. And this just lays it out so clearly. On one side, you have Rembrandt. The subject is a human body. The method is physical dissection, and the goal is scientific understanding. On the other side, Alan Moore. The subject is a character's identity. The method is narrative deconstruction, and the goal is a shocking narrative revelation. They both performed an anatomy lesson to uncover what was really going on underneath. You know, this quote here is about Rembrandt's paintings, but it could just as easily be about Alan Moore's comic. Both of these works went so far beyond their literal subject. Rembrandt's paintings weren't just about anatomy. They were about society and science and death. And Moore's comic wasn't just about a swamp monster. It became this incredible story about what it means to be human. They both achieved a kind of transcendence. So, when you get right down to it, the anatomy lesson is so much more than just a historical event or a comic book storyline. It's actually a whole new way of seeing, a really powerful tool for looking at the world around you and challenging your first impressions. In fact, we can break this whole idea down into a simple 3-step method you can use for anything. Step 1, you isolate the subject. For Rembrandt, it was the body. For Moore, it was the character's identity. Step 2, you dismantle the components. You literally or metaphorically take it apart to see all the pieces. And then step 3, by looking at those pieces, you reveal the underlying truth, that hidden structure you just couldn't see before. And this is why it matters. This whole way of thinking helps us question the things we just take for granted. It pushes us to look past the surface of things, whether it's a story or an argument or an institution, and to really understand the fundamental ideas that are actually driving them. So that leaves us with one last fascinating question. For you, whether it's an old idea you've always held, a complicated system at work, or even a part of your own identity, what in your world is just sitting there, waiting for its own anatomy